Hi guys, so Boris Johnson attempted to backpedal on his comments regarding devolution. So he had described it as a disaster. He described it as Tony Blair's biggest mistake. Now what you're going to see in this video is him attempting to backpedal. He's going to try and combine devolution with the SNP and attack, of course, the SNP, and by default attack devolution, but pretend that he's not. He's also actually going to attempt to reach out to the SNP, which is quite interesting. So let's hear what he had to say, and I'll give some commentary.
I know that comments that I made the other day on devolution have been widely reported, leaked, not entirely accurately, but never mind. Since there were no press in the room, I'll give you my round unvarnished view. The way the SNP have handled devolution in Scotland has been a disaster, from plummeting education standards, low business confidence, and the lowest satisfaction ever in public services.
Okay, so is this true? Well, it's a bit difficult to find data to back up what he's saying, so I'll have to go with what data I have found. Now, let's go back a little bit in time. This is to the middle of the year, and once again, this is the latest data I can find regarding support for the SNP, for the Scottish government. But this is during the end of April. And I don't think a lot of this data really has changed. Maybe it's actually gone in the direction of more support for the Scottish National Party. Now, this is 3/4 of Scots think the Scottish government is handling coronavirus well. So this is related to coronavirus. All Scots, 74% believe they're doing well. The government is doing a good job. 19% think they're doing badly. I want you to look at this figure here. In 2019 Conservative voters, so voters who voted for the Conservative Party, 70% of them back in April, the end of April, believed the Scottish government were doing a good job when it came to the pandemic. That's unbelievable. You know, you would imagine it would be much more polarized. You would imagine it would be 50-50, or a minority would think that the Scottish government are doing a good job. But that's very encouraging for the SNP. Now, I'll just go down a little bit. If we compare Scotland to the UK and ask Scots what do they think about Boris Johnson's handling of, or the UK government's handling of the pandemic, we see a different picture. So this is, Scots are least likely to think the UK government is handling the coronavirus outbreak well. Of all Britons, 58% believe the government is doing a good job. Once again, I think these numbers have changed somewhat, not in favour of the government, unfortunately. But if we compare England, Wales and Scotland, you can see the Scots, 47% think the government is doing a good job, while 48% back in April thought the government were doing a bad job. Now, once again, I think these numbers have changed somewhat, maybe not dramatically, but not in the favour of Boris Johnson and his government. Now, here's an article from the 14th of October. It says here, poll, Scots satisfied with Nicola Sturgeon as Boris Johnson's rating tanks. So it says here, the results come from a poll released today, the 14th of October, from Ipsos Mori, a Scottish political monitor, which is run in partnership with STV News, and also revealed record support for independence. They also revealed Nicola Sturgeon's personal ratings are extremely positive, with 72% of the Scottish public satisfied with her performance and 24% dissatisfied. So it changed a little bit since if we compare it to the previous graph. This makes a net satisfaction rating of 49%. The other three main party leaders clocked negative ratings of minus 25% for Leonard, the Labour leader, 17% for the Tory head Douglas Ross, and minus 1% for Willie Rennie of the Liberal Democrats. So in this recent poll from the middle of October, Nicola Sturgeon is very positive. She has a great approval rating, extremely positive. So I think we can probably extend that to her government. But let's hear what else Boris had to say.
It's an abysmal record. The key is to have policies that show how devolution can work for Scotland, for the people in Scotland, rather than the SNP obsession with making devolution work against the rest of the UK.
How? Can you give us some examples, Boris, of how the SNP are implementing policies that make devolution work against the rest of the UK? You can say these things, but you have to give us some examples.
Just because I've criticised the performance of devolution doesn't mean I want to oppose devolution as a concept in itself. Of course not. I'm a former mayor of London, and I know how effective devolved powers can be, for example, in making transport greener or tackling crime. Devolution should be used not by politicians as a wall to sequester, to break away an area of the UK.
Okay, but why can't you describe some of the positive? So if you were honest, you would say, look, here is how devolution has worked. Here is how it hasn't worked. And on a balance, it hasn't worked. So, what you're doing is you're criticizing the SNP, but you're not criticizing them on anything specific. You're just saying they're creating policies that make devolution work against the rest of the UK. But he hasn't given us any examples. He hasn't said something specific. He said this policy is unconstitutional, or this policy is working against the interests of the UK. Then we could debate that. But he's not doing that. He started off by criticizing the SNP. And now he's saying that he's not critical of devolution.
UK from the rest. It should be used as a step to pass power to local communities and businesses to make their lives better. And it's that kind of localism which I believe in and I want to take further. Following the agreement made at the time of the Smith Commission in 2016, not only to devolve more powers to Edinburgh, which we've done, but to devolve more powers from Edinburgh to the councils and communities across Scotland.
So Boris keeps talking about we're going to devolve more powers to Edinburgh. We're going to give Scotland more powers. But if you think the SNP are doing a bad job, why would you be giving them more power? Now, I don't believe he's giving them more powers. He's pretending to give Scotland more power. He's not really giving them more power. It's more a power grab where, what the government are doing with the Internal Market Bill is to set up a body that is under the control of Westminster. And they decide, for example, food standards and things like that, not the Scottish government. So they're taking power, they're delivering a power to Scotland, but the Scottish government aren't going to be able to use that power. It's under the control of Westminster. But it gives the impression that they're returning some power or delivering power to Scotland. But if Boris Johnson truly believed that the SNP were a disaster, not devolution was a disaster, and the SNP are the ones in power, why would you be giving them more power? Does anyone see the contradiction here? It's similar to what happens in the United States. The Democrats complain about Donald Trump. Donald Trump is a disaster. Donald Trump is a disaster. Now let's give him, a bigger military budget. I'm not comparing the two, of course. I'm just showing you the ridiculousness of this rhetoric. Boris Johnson is saying that the SNP are a disaster. So what my government is going to do is going to give them more power. It doesn't make any sense. But of course, he's not going to do that. It's just for the voters, he's saying this.
But this is not the moment, frankly, for division or distraction about our national constitution. In order for us to tackle the shared and common thread that is COVID-19, the focus on separation has got to stop. And
so Boris Johnson is talking, we need to stop talking about separating ourselves, from a bigger block when there's a pandemic. Maybe you're right, Boris. So then why did you ignore me and other Remainers and other people when we said you should extend the Brexit transition period so you can focus on the pandemic. Back in July, there was a possibility, June, July, to extend the transition period because of this pandemic. And you said, no, Brexit is more important. We have to deal with Brexit. We can deal with the pandemic and Brexit together. You're obsessed with getting Brexit done. You know, what was the problem with extending the transition period? So you can focus minds, you can focus resources on dealing with the pandemic. But you decided not to do that. You thought Brexit was more important. So you said, no, we're not going to extend the transition period. We're going to end as I had promised, to hell or high water. I don't care. We're going to end the transition period when I decided. We're not going to extend it. Now, you can't really blame the SNP for wanting independence during the pandemic, because you were asking for Brexit during the pandemic.
For it to stop, so must the division. So I want to thank the Scottish Government for the way it has worked.
So now he's attempting to play the uniter. He's reaching out his hand with an olive branch in his hand. It's more like a nettle or poison ivy. But what he's trying to do here is play the good cop. You know, I criticized the SNP. I said that they're not good at governing. It's a disaster. They're a disaster. But look at what good things they do. We are working together for our own mutual benefit. He's trying to play the good cop here.
With all of us, with the UK government, with other devolved administrations, to try to tackle this virus over these past few months. I want to thank Nicola. I want to appeal to them to continue working.
Notice he uses uses her on a first term basis, like on Nicola. He's not saying Miss Sturgeon or Nicola Sturgeon or the First Minister. He's saying Nicola.
With us, making use of the vaccine stocks, test kits and new technology that come from being part of what is one of the world's leading scientific superpowers. COVID-19 doesn't care about constitutional arrangements, and whatever our political differences, we all need to work together at this time to protect the health and jobs of the people of Scotland. And from our UK test and trace labs to supporting struggling businesses, working together is what we are doing, and that's got to be.
You notice that this is written by the Scottish Conservatives. This is probably written by the Scottish Conservatives. Boris, read this. I don't believe Boris Johnson believes what he's saying. You know, at the beginning he criticized the SNP. Now he's saying, thank you for all the hard work that you've done. It doesn't make any sense. If devolution is not working, why would you devolve more powers to Scotland? Of course, you're not doing that. Once again, I want to be very clear. Boris Johnson is not handing over power to Nicola Sturgeon. He needs to do something. He is undermining the union. He has basically thrown the Scottish Tories under a bus recently by saying devolution is a disaster, because devolution is extremely popular in Scotland. Even with Conservatives. At the beginning, no, because it was a Tony Blair policy. Now it's very popular. The Tories understand that if somebody comes along and undermines devolution, it puts them in a very difficult spot. The Tories will criticize all day long independence, but they won't allow Boris Johnson to criticize devolution, because it's not going to win them any support. It actually costs them support.
Be everybody's priority right now. So if my first message is thank you for what you have done over the last very difficult 8 months, my second is that there is hope on the horizon. And the best way to take that hope and turn it into a better, brighter future that we all want to see is to continue to work.
Sorry, it got cut off. It said to work together. You see here, he's trying to reach out to the Scottish people. He's trying to say, look, we have to get through this together. We're stronger together. If we work, as a united country, we can overcome these difficult times. But I think it's too late, Boris. Excuse me. I think it's too late. That ship has sailed. The Scots want independence. The more you speak about Scotland, the more you ridicule their MPs in Parliament, the worse you make the situation for the Unionists. I think what's going to happen now is you're going to see both the Labour Party and the Conservative Party working together. It will not be a very friendly coalition, but they will work together to thwart the SNP and independence. That's what their goal now moving forward is. In Parliament in Westminster, they're not going to join forces, but in Scotland they will, because they want to stop it. Because if they don't, they will be destroyed. They will cease to exist. I'm not saying those individuals will cease to exist. Those institutions will cease to exist. And I did talk about this before, how after independence, it's completely reasonable to imagine that the SNP would split up, would dissolve, basically. Not immediately, but I think you could probably see the SNP dissolving into different factions. You'd have the left wing forming its own Labour type party, the right wing forming its own People's Party or Conservative Party. You would see a number of different parties, and Scotland would probably become a coalition government combining different groups. But the Labour Party and the Conservative Party of today would certainly disappear. Let me know in the comment section, guys, what you thought about all of this. As always, your comments are greatly appreciated. Thanks a lot.